There are places in every town that seem to exist in a twilight zone, caught between the mundane and the macabre. For me, that place was the old antiques shop on Oak Street. Its dusty windows and creaky sign always gave me a feeling of unease, but curiosity got the better of me one rainy evening. I stepped inside, the bell above the door tinkling softly as I entered. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and forgotten memories. Shelves were cluttered with relics from the past, worn-out furniture, vintage clothing, and peculiar knickknacks that had long lost their purpose. But it was the mirrors that caught my attention. They lined the walls, each one unique and adorned with ornate frames that spoke of different eras. There was something unsettling about their collective presence, as if they were silently watching, waiting. As I wandered deeper into the shop, I noticed a large full-length mirror at the back, covered in a heavy, dusty cloth. Intrigued, I reached out and pulled the cloth away. The mirror was old, its glass slightly tarnished, but it reflected my image with eerie clarity. For a moment, I felt a strange sensation, as if the mirror was pulling me in, drawing me into its depths. "Find something you like?" A voice startled me, and I turned to see the shopkeeper, a gaunt, elderly man with sharp, piercing eyes. He moved quietly, almost too quietly, and his presence made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "I'm just looking," I replied, trying to mask my discomfort. He nodded, his gaze lingering on the mirror. "That one's special," he said. "It's been here longer than I have. People say it's haunted." I laughed nervously, unsure if he was joking. "Haunted?" "Yes," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They call him the Mirror Man. It's said that if you look into that mirror at the stroke of midnight, you'll see him standing behind you, watching." I shivered, feeling a chill despite the warmth of the shop. "What happens if you see him?" The shopkeeper's eyes darkened. "No one knows for sure. Some say he steals your reflection, trapping you in the mirror. Others say he follows you, haunting you until he drives you mad." I tried to brush off his words, but they left a lingering sense of dread. I thanked him and hurried out of the shop, the rain falling heavily as I made my way home. The thought of the Mirror Man stayed with me, haunting my thoughts. That night, the storm intensified. The wind howled and the rain lashed against the windows as if trying to break in. I found myself unable to sleep, the shopkeeper's story replaying in my mind. At precisely midnight, I felt a strange compulsion to check my own reflection. I walked to the hallway where an old, ornate mirror hung. As I approached, the shadows seemed to deepen and the air grew cold. I stood before the mirror, my heart pounding in my chest, and stared into the glass. At first, I saw only my own reflection, pale and tense in the dim light. But as the clock struck 12, something changed. The edges of the mirror darkened, and a figure began to materialize behind me. A tall, shadowy form with hollow eyes and a sinister smile. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to turn around to run, but I was frozen in place, captivated by the figure's gaze. The Mirror Man leaned closer, his cold breath whispering against my ear. "You're mine now," he murmured, his voice a low, guttural hiss. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder and finally managed to tear my eyes away, spinning around to face the intruder. But there was no one there. The hallway was empty, and the only sound was the ticking of the clock and the pounding of my heart. I turned back to the mirror, and to my horror, the Mirror Man was still there, now grinning with a malevolent glee. His hand was outstretched, pressing against the glass as if trying to break through. In a panic, I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy candlestick, and smashed it against the mirror. The glass shattered, pieces flying everywhere, and the figure vanished. I stood there, gasping for breath, surrounded by shards of broken glass. The following days were a blur of fear and anxiety. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched, that the Mirror Man was still with me. Every reflective surface became a source of dread, and I found myself avoiding mirrors altogether. But it didn't matter. The Mirror Man was relentless. I began seeing his shadow in the corner of my eye, hearing his whisper in the dead of night. My reflection in windows and puddles seemed to twist and distort, his sinister grin lurking just beneath the surface. Desperate, I returned to the antique shop, hoping to find some way to rid myself of the curse. But when I arrived, the shop was gone, replaced by an empty lot. There was no sign it had ever existed. I was left with no answers, no hope of escape. The Mirror Man had claimed me, and no matter where I went or what I did, he was always there, a dark presence lurking just out of sight. I became a prisoner in my own home, my life consumed by fear and paranoia. Now, as I write this, I can feel his cold gaze on me. I don't know how much longer I can endure his torment. If you ever come across a mirror, be careful. You never know who or what might be looking back at you. It was a cold, rainy night when we decided to explore the ruins of Hollowbrook Asylum, a long-abandoned mental institution on the outskirts of town. The asylum had been closed for decades, shrouded in tales of madness and tragedy. Locals whispered of the restless spirits that roamed its halls, but we were young and curious, eager for a thrill. My friends Lisa, Jack, and I drove out to the asylum, the rain pouring down in torrents, turning the narrow road into a river of mud. The trees loomed over us like silent sentinels, their branches swaying ominously in the wind. When we finally reached the asylum, its decaying facade emerged from the darkness, a grim silhouette against the stormy sky. "Are you sure about this?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of excitement and fear. Jack, always the bravest of us, grinned. "Come on, where's your sense of adventure? It's just an old building." We stepped out of the car, our flashlights cutting through the rain-soaked gloom. The asylum's entrance was a gaping maw, its doors long gone, swallowed by the creeping vines and decay. We hesitated for a moment, then crossed the threshold, our footsteps echoing eerily in the cavernous space. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mold and damp, mingling with a faint metallic tang that set my nerves on edge. The walls were covered in peeling paint and graffiti, and broken furniture littered the floor. It was a place frozen in time, forgotten by the world, but not by the spirits that lingered. We wandered through the labyrinthine corridors, our flashlights flickering in the darkness. The sound of rain was muffled by the walls, leaving an oppressive silence that made every creak and groan of the building seem amplified. As we turned a corner, we came across a room that looked like it had once been an office. Papers were strewn across the floor, and an old rusted desk stood against the far wall. "Check this out," Jack said, picking up a dusty file from the floor. He flipped through the yellowed pages, his brow furrowing. "It's a patient record. Looks like they were experimenting on them," Lisa shuddered. "This place gives me the creeps. Let's keep moving." We continued deeper into the asylum, the corridors narrowing and the air growing colder. The further we went, the stronger the sense of unease became, as if we were intruding on a place we had no right to be. Then we heard it, a faint ghostly whisper, drifting through the darkness like a chill breeze. We froze, our flashlights casting shaky beams of light around us. "Did you hear that?" Lisa whispered, clutching Jack's arm. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "It came from down there," I said, pointing to a darkened hallway that led to the basement. Jack, undeterred, led the way, and we followed reluctantly. The stairs creaked ominously under our weight, and the temperature dropped noticeably as we descended into the bowels of the asylum. The basement was even more dilapidated than the upper floors, with crumbling walls and puddles of stagnant water reflecting our flashlight beams. We reached a door at the end of the hallway, its paint faded and chipped. Jack pushed it open, revealing a large, dimly lit room filled with old medical equipment, rusted gurneys, broken surgical tools, and empty restraints hanging from the walls. "This must have been the operating room," Jack said, his voice hushed. As we stepped inside, the whispering grew louder, more distinct. It sounded like a multitude of voices, all speaking at once, their words overlapping in a cacophony of anguish and despair. We stood there, frozen in fear, as the whispers seemed to converge into a single, mournful voice. "Help us!" The plea sent a shiver down my spine, and I could see the same terror reflected in my friend's eyes. "We need to leave," Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. But as we turned to go, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. We rushed to it, but it wouldn't budge, as if some invisible force was holding it closed. Panic set in, and we pounded on the door, desperate to escape. Then the room began to grow colder, and a dense fog seeped in from the corners, swirling around us. Out of the mist, a figure emerged. A woman in a tattered hospital gown, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. She hovered above the ground, her feet not touching the floor, and her gaze fixed on us with a haunting intensity. "Please," she whispered, her voice echoing in the cold, empty room. "Help us." We backed away, our fear overwhelming us. The woman drifted closer, her form becoming more solid, more real. I could see the pain etched into her features, the suffering that had trapped her in this place. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking. "Release us," she said, her eyes pleading. "Release us from this torment." Before we could respond, the room filled with more ghostly figures, their forms flickering in and out of existence. They reached out to us, their voices blending into a chorus of agony and despair. Desperate to escape, we searched the room for any way out. Jack found a window, partially hidden behind a stack of old boxes. We scrambled to clear the way, our movements frantic and clumsy. The window was small and high up, but it was our only hope. One by one, we climbed through, squeezing our way out into the rain-soaked night. We landed in the muddy courtyard, gasping for breath, and ran without looking back. The asylum loomed behind us, its dark silhouette fading into the storm as we fled. We didn't stop running until we reached the car, our hearts pounding and our clothes soaked through. As we drove away, the rain hammering against the windshield, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had left something behind, something we couldn't escape. Later, we learned that Hollowbrook Asylum had been closed after a fire broke out in this basement, trapping dozens of patients inside. The fire had been set intentionally, and the staff had abandoned the building, leaving the patients to perish in the flames. Their spirits had been trapped there ever since, seeking release from their eternal suffering. We never spoke of our experience at the asylum again, but I can still hear the whispering in my dreams, the mournful plea of the ghosts trapped in Hollowbrook Asylum. And on stormy nights when the rain pounds against the windows, I wonder if they are still there, waiting for someone to finally set them free.